We presented most of this information on Tuesday. Myself and Edward Easterling will talk specifically about the rate restructuring and some of the rationale around it from our perspective anyway. Julie Comstock will also be presenting around our customer credit program, which is a reporting item today and is contingent on the approval of the rate restructuring proposal. So we'll go ahead and just step through some of the conversation that we had on Tuesday, and obviously the public that may be watching today. You know, obviously, as we've heard today very clearly, this industry is changing very clearly. We've talked about what's going on in the wholesale market. We've talked about renewable energy, natural gas. We've talked about regional transmission organizations. We've talked about the changing demands and styles and choices of customers. So we've seen that. We've seen technology changes both inside our homes and outside our homes. And we know that this industry is transforming and changing. And I know many folks have said publicly that we're behind the 8 ball and we're lagging, and I would contend we're trying to move forward. We're trying to transform the organization. We're trying to transform what we have historically done into what we believe we'll be doing in the future, and I'll talk a little bit about that. You know, we're committed to this transformation, and I think as many have referenced here today in their comments, you know, we put together a future generation plan that made our commitment to over 30% of our energy will be coming from renewable sources. We've talked about additional renewable sources that we're in conversations with as we speak today. Our commitment to energy conservation, demand side management with 300 megawatts of demand side management initiative in play as we speak today, and in that also comes energy conservation impacts. So we're certainly committed to what we've talked about and what we've said, and we're living up to that commitment in our transformation conversation. We've talked about and presented to the board in my CEO report our commitment to look at a community solar project, which the team is in place, and that work is being worked on as we speak today. So why do we need the rate restructuring? We've heard a little bit about revenue stabilization, but from my perspective, it's really about sending the right price signal. It's really about our current methodology, as Chair McGuire talked about, has been in the utility industry for 50, 60 years, and we need to think about how that methodology changes to really kind of meet what we believe the future holds and that transformation and what that looks like. You know, we don't want to rely on volumetric usage to cover fixed cost, and not all fixed costs, but just some fixed costs relative to our customer charges that are there, whether a customer uses energy or not, or our distribution charges that are there, whether a customer uses energy or not. So those charges we think are very appropriate to be covered in some fixed format in some way. Our transition around this is really to move to a smart grid. And we've heard people, and I think we agree in so many ways about what the future looks like. The issue may be on how we transition. And so our perspective is we do move to a smart grid. We do move to smart meters and AMI meters. We do move to a grid that's self-healing. We do move to a grid that allows the exchange of customer energy and our energy to stabilize the grid and have the capability to be able to do that going forward in the future. We believe that's pretty important. So we certainly agree on that strategy going forward. It's the transition that obviously is creating some of the discussion that we've been having over the last several months. We provided a variety of different board presentations and public presentations in the community and to our board about rate restructuring and kind of the impact of costs that are in rates relative to fixed and variable cost. We've really looked at the industry who have implemented a variety of different things, and not just our industry, by the way, on how they have looked at this kind of impact and change in their energy, and certainly the knowledge about those that have implemented it incredibly well. We followed our stakeholder process to get input and perspective from customers, whether that be market research, whether it be the open houses that we've had. We've listened to that feedback, and with that feedback and the direction of the board, we're in a position to make some recommended changes of what was originally proposed in our November board meeting. And I just at that point in time think it's really important that we recognize the employees, certainly at OPPD, in conjunction with the voices that we heard, specifically around low-income income and low use customers, on how we look at that transitional impact. And we're deeply concerned about that as well. And that's why we have the customer credit program that Vice President Comstock will speak to in just a little bit. So with that, I'd like to introduce Edward Easterling up to essentially take us through and Edward, I'm going to give you the clicker here. I don't think you want me to do your clicking.
No
so
way.
There you go. Great, thanks. You can use the middle one too if you want.
So I'd like to provide an overview of management's rate restructuring proposal. And thanks, Tim, for the introduction. Basically, what we're talking about is a change in the composition of the residential and small commercial customer bills. As we heard the rhetorical question asked earlier, this is not a rate increase. It is a restructuring. This is revenue neutral. And I'll explain that a little bit more in just a moment. So what we're proposing is to increase the fixed portion of the bill and decreasing the usage rate that's included in the bill. And the combination of the two for the average customer would be revenue neutral. There are some customers that would receive a slight increase or a larger increase. There are some that could receive a decrease. And there are some that could receive very little change at all. This proposal applies both to the residential and the small commercial categories. As you know, and as you've heard, and as you have personally witnessed, many of you, management has been engaged with stakeholders. Tim mentioned, and I will go through some of the recommendations or revisions to the November proposal. First and foremost, one of the changes is to remove the transmission-related costs from the service charge. When fully implemented, that's a $5 per month reduction. By doing that, it increases the usage fee or the energy fee that's included in the bill structure today, and that allows a little more control over the customer's usage to influence their bill. There's a larger percentage of their bill that varies with the amount of energy that they use. It also allows for a smoother transition of this increase over the 4-year period. Also, we share a common concern here with regard to low usage, low income customers, and we've developed a program to share that. We'll share that with you in a few moments. It's not part of my presentation, but it's part of a following presentation. To give you a little more information, we have 2 sections to this table. The first is the residential, the second is the small commercial. Under each section, you can see the November proposal of the fixed fee charge, the delivery charge, if you will, compared to what we're currently proposing. So for the residential category or customer, today it's $10.25 per month, and we're proposing to increase that to $15 June 1, 2016. That's a $3 reduction from what was proposed in November. That amount would then increase to $20, $25, and $30 over the following increase periods. That compares to the prior proposal of increasing to $35. Small commercial follows a very similar pattern from $13.53 to $18, which is a $4.47 increase, and then a $5 increase per year after that to $23, $28, and $33. A couple of other changes on this slide from what we said are proposed in November. Number one, in November we said that the actual increase amounts would be based on the cost of service. In other words, the cost in that year would influence the amount of the increase. We heard the concern, we understand it, and what we're proposing today is to implement the amounts that are shown on the table. So there would be no increase if the cost of service yielded a higher rate. We would adopt what's on the schedule. However, when we get to 2019, if the actual cost indicates the fee should be lower, we would implement the lower amount. If it indicates it should be above $30, we could either implement the $30 amount that's shown on the table, or we could come back to the board and ask the board for approval to increase above the $30 level. Now, there was a comment made earlier about fixed cost, customer's bill, et cetera. I want to provide a little information with regard to that. Ms. Monroe presented our corporate operating plan. And in that corporate operating plan, she presented a pie chart. And it was $1.2 billion to operate the company. In that pie chart, it includes both fixed and variable costs. The debt service is the most, we have to make principal and interest payments regardless of whether we operate the system or not. That is an obligation. It's just like your mortgage payment or your rent payment or anything else. If you're in that residence, you have an obligation to pay it. The next is the non-fuel O&M portion. Because we're a utility, and because we construct infrastructure, and because we have to supply customers on an instantaneous basis, what that means is everyone could go home today and throw their light switch on, and it's our responsibility to make sure we're connected and we're providing service instantaneous to your decision to use our product. There's a lot of engineering and a lot of infrastructure and a lot of cost that goes into making that happen. It's not magic. It's a lot of hard work, and it's not inexpensive. If we take our debt and the cost of operating and maintaining all of that equipment so that it is available to serve you, it's about 65% of our cost. 65 to 70% of our cost of running this business is fixed. 35% is variable. That represents the fuel that we purchase to turn and convert into energy, and it represents the power that we may buy when we're not generating, we're supplying from another source. That's our cost structure. That's what it is like to operate the company. Our revenue stream is the inverse of that. Based on our rate structure today for residential customers, we have a $10 charge, which is fixed. That's a fixed fee. Remember, our cost is 70% fixed. The rest of our revenue is variable based on the usage level that people take from the system. So therein lies the conflict. 10% of our revenue is fixed, 90% is variable. On our cost structure, 70% is fixed and 30% is variable. That is a very difficult balance to manage when people are changing the way they use our system. We also have some directives that were given to us by the board, and as part of our governance process, and it guides what management does in the proposals that we make in response to. One of them I'd like to highlight is Competitive Rates Strategic Directive 2. In that rate, that policy, it provides rate principles. And we take those principles into consideration when we're looking at any change that we're going to make. And those principles are as follows: fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory, equitably assigned cost across and within customer classes, be simple and easy to understand, encourage demand reduction, energy efficiency, pursue time of use rates, and offer flexibility and options. As we look at this proposal, we are sure, or we believe, that we comply with the board's direction on the first 4 items. I will concede that changing the structure reduces the incentive to conserve. However, we do have other programs and rate offerings in place that also support that. So in balance, it does comply. The last 2 items on the chart basically have an NA there. And the reason for that is those are future options that we're looking at. And what we would like to do is get this rate structure understood so that we can put the proper pricing signals going forward into those programs. It's hard to plan if you don't know what your structure is going to be from year to year. So part of this proposal is creating transparency, number one, for us and for the board, so we know what the future looks like, and we can start developing long-term plans on where we think the business is going, and we can be successful in getting there. It also provides transparency to our customers as they're making decisions. They understand where our rate structure is going to be, and they can take that information into consideration as they make their decisions. The last thing we want to do is surprise you or surprise our customers. So while I understand this is controversial, it is also, I believe, our duty to inform you on what's going on in the industry and where we think the industry is going. And as a part of management, it's our job to supply you what you need and when you want it and do it in a reliable fashion. And we think this is part of what's required. Now, as we look at energy efficiency, we wanted to present an example that demonstrates that energy efficiency is still part of this proposal. And so if you have a customer who has a 9-SEER air conditioning unit today, and they decide they want to change their air conditioning unit to a 13-SEER, what does that do to the economics of that decision? Under current rates, that customer would save $141 per year today. If we look into the future and we put in the $30 service charges fully implemented, that customer would still save $110. So is the incentive to reduce energy lessened? It is. Do customers still have incentive to reduce energy? Yes. With regard to fairness, there's been a lot of discussion around the fairness objective. And I would say that anytime you look at something and you're looking at a change, anytime there's a change, there are certain things that happen. Sometimes there are unintended consequences, and I think that's the case today as we talk through this. But the basic assumption, and I think a lot of our discussions is today's structure fair? We're wanting to change from where we are today, and we're questioning whether the change is fair, but we're not really debating about the current structure and whether it's fair or not. And I will tell you, as staff has looked through this particular area and done risk assessments and a number of analyses that trends into the future, there are some concerns. Their price signals are distorted. If you look at your residential rate today, it is a bundled rate. What I mean by bundled is you're paying a $10 service charge, and then you're paying about a 10 cents per hour kilowatt hour charge. That kilowatt hour charge includes the cost of distribution, the cost of transmission, the cost of generation, whether it's the fixed cost of owning and operating that facility or the fuel and purchase power. So you're actually taking fixed cost and dividing it by the amount of energy to produce a rate. And it provides for all those services. When a customer decides they're going to conserve, and they say, I'm going to use 1 kilowatt hour less than I would have used other than taking upon this action, they save 10 cents. So the customer conserves 1 kilowatt hour, and they save 10 cents on their bill. What happens to OPPD is we lose 10 cents from the customer. We look at our cost structure, and our cost structure goes down 3 cents. 7 cents stays, the fixed cost. And what happens is we go through rate making and rate design, that 7 cents gets reallocated to other customers. And so the unintended consequence of this is by taking this action, we're just shifting costs from one customer to another customer or your neighbor. And we think there's an opportunity to better protect customers from some of the unintended consequences. In summary, competing interests must be balanced. There's no perfect structure for all 360,000 customers. The proposed structure more equitably assigns cost within the residential and small commercial classes. It maintains, albeit at a lower amount, the ability to reduce the bill through lower usage. It provides a basis for re-examining the use of declining block energy rates. Now, why would this appear in this slide? I see people shaking their heads. I mentioned earlier that when a customer uses more energy, they overpay on fixed costs. And that's been questioned, and I'll tell you why that is. The reason that is what I just explained. If you develop a rate, and that rate includes 90% of your fixed cost, and you're only paying for 10% of that fixed cost in a fixed fee, as a customer uses more energy, they're paying a larger portion of fixed cost. And at some point, they're paying more than their fair share of the fixed cost. So what you do is you look at How do we mitigate this so that we don't overcharge customers when they use our product? Remember, cost of service, fair, reasonable, non-discriminatory. Through that, we look at, okay, at certain points, you can reduce the energy rate so that you're not continuing to collect all of the fixed cost. The next point is improves the pricing foundation for an industry in transition, and it is consistent with board policy. The last item, the low income, low usage credit program, addresses the main unintended consequence, and I would say it's a shared concern with if not with all of you, many of you here today and many of our customers. Management has heard it, we've taken it serious, and we've put together a proposal on that.